Hi everyone. So if you are viewing this lecture which is on manuscript writing, I assume that you have brought your scientific project or your thesis to a logical stage where you are done with the analysis, you have your results in hand, and now you want to put it out for the larger scientific community to read your results and what you have come up with. By now, you have spent a lot of energy conceiving, conducting and analyzing your data that most of us tend to lose momentum at this stage. But let me tell you that it is as much your responsibility to write up your results and put it out there for the scientific community and for larger public consumption. As scientists, it is our responsibility to advocate for our own research findings so that they see the light of the day and reflect in a change of practice or guideline and make a difference in the community. So, at the end of this session, you should be able to have a basic understanding of the following, which will be to organize your ideas logically and sequentially within a predefined structure. You should be able to furnish some additional information and give your manuscript its final form before it goes out there to the scientific community. And you should be able to articulate your ideas very effectively so that the message that you want to communicate is delivered very effectively. So what is a manuscript? A manuscript is any document that is submitted for publication. It could be a piece of music, it could be a poetry, but here we are talking about scientific manuscripts, which again could fall into a lot of different categories. It could be your original research work, it could be a piece of review of literature, it could be a correspondence, it could be a perspective, or it could also be an editorial. So before we begin writing, so where do you start? So you have traveled so far with your project and you have reached a stage where you want to start writing it. So when do you start? So let us say you should have your final results in the form of tables and figures ready. You should have 2 to 3 central ideas or the key points or recommendations that you want your readers to take home at the end of reading your article. So also you need to have the outline of the argument that you are willing to place before the scientific community through your article. So this essentially would be your starting point. So let us look at the first objective, wherein we will be framing this broad structure within which you would be writing your manuscript, and within each section in this structure, let us see how you would be organizing your ideas logically and sequentially. So in manuscript writing, we broadly talk about the IMRD structure, I for introduction, M for methods, R for results and D for discussion. So in the introduction, it is basically why did you start out or why did you set off in pursuing this particular research question. In methods, you would be talking about what you actually did to answer your research question. In the results section, you would talk about what you found, and in discussion, all of it basically comes together where you try to say what it all means. At this point in the lecture, I would request you to pause and pick up an article which you might have written or any scientific article that is published in a high impact factor journal of your specialty. You could then follow this lecture to see whether each of the sections that we are discussing here alongside the section in that particular article. This is an example article which I will be discussing throughout this lecture. Now, this article is titled Impact and Operational Feasibility of TrueNAT MTB RIF under India's RNTCP. So, you can similarly follow the article of your choice to see whether the sections that we are discussing here are well written or covered properly in that particular article. So let us first look at introduction. You understand that when a given reader reads your article, his mind could be in 1,000 places. So the first job of the introduction is zooming in. Of all the things that could be running in the reader's mind, you zoom in to the particular research topic that you are going to be discussing in your article. So in this place, you are going to be giving a background of your research area. What were the knowledge gaps that you identified, which basically sets the stage for stating the rationale of your research project. And finally, you spell out those specific objectives that your project seeks to answer. That would be the job of the introduction section. The next section is on methods, where you basically explain what you did to meet your objectives, and this you do in very simple terms. The methods section is usually where you give excruciating details and basically spell out what you did one by one, stepwise. This should give the scientific reader complete clarity on what you have done and adds to the credibility and reliability of your results. Please note that the methods section could vary from study to study and may have different subsections depending on the study design that you have chosen. So, a broad outline of methods section in an original article would look something like this, where you have a study settings. One should remember that you could have international readers reading your article, so you need to give them a sense of the study setting, a sense of context so that they understand and interpret your results correctly. Then you spell out the study design, the operational definitions that you have used in your study, the sampling strategy, the sample size, the study procedures, which is basically how your study rolled out, how the data was collected, what kind of investigations were performed and all that. The next section would be about data management, which involves both data collection and analysis, and the final section would be about human participants protection, which is basically you explaining what were the ethical principles that you adhered to while conducting your research project. So, it would be good for you to now look at the research article that you have in hand and see what type of research article it is, and if it is an original research article, it should essentially have the sections that we just discussed. Now coming to the results. This could be the briefest section in your article, where you only state what your study found. You are basically presenting your study findings. You could present it as a combination of text and different types of representations. It could be tables, figures, graphs, images. But again, you make sure that you don't repeat yourself here and stick to whatever guidelines that your journal is suggesting you in terms of number of tables and number of figures. There is no interpretation or commenting allowed in the results section. So, you plainly state what you have found in your study without delving into trying to comment on it or interpret it, which essentially has to be reserved for the discussion section. So, here is an example where you could see that the results are presented as a combination of text, tables and figures. The next section of your manuscript is the discussion section, which is my most favorite part of any manuscript. I would even go to say that this is the part which requires the most investment from the researcher himself or herself. This is basically where you look at your results and try to make sense of it. It is where you start thinking as an independent researcher and put out your original interpretations and your own inferences from your data. I would say when you write your first complete discussion, I would say it is a coming of age experience and a definite milestone for you as a researcher. So, what is there in the discussion section is first a summary of your key findings. Now, this would be not in more than 3 lines, where you briefly tell what are the key findings that your study has come out with, and those are the findings that you will be exploring further in your discussion. This will be followed by your interpretations of your results and your inferences based on them. Some of us also try to compare our findings with other findings in existing literature. Very often, especially postgraduate students tend to make the mistake of dwelling too much in comparing their results with other existing literature and forget to add their own interpretations and inferences. So, you should be able to balance between comparing your research findings with other findings that exist in literature, but there is more onus on your interpretations and inferences. Now, that is basically why I come to read your article, to know what you think as a researcher. The next section would be on strengths and limitations. Do not tend to try to boast too much, but please feel free to list all the strengths of your study. It could be in terms of study design, it could be a novel methodology or a novel tool or a very remote area. So, whatever it is that is very unique to your study, please mention it under the strengths. The next would be on limitations, where you list the limitations that your study is likely to suffer from. Go easy here with the limitations. Be honest in reporting all the limitations so that the reader is able to bear these limitations in mind while interpreting your study results. Also mention how each of your limitations are likely to or not likely to influence your study results. This will be followed by the conclusions, where you give that one take home result or that one key finding or that one conclusion that you arrive at the end of all your discussion. This would be followed by the recommendation, where you probably go in to suggest how the consumer of your article, which could be a policy maker, which could be a practicing clinician, how he or she is recommended to work on your particular conclusion. Now, very often people make the mistake of concluding something that they have not discussed thus far in the article. So, a quick check here would be to see that their conclusions are in line with what you have studied in your article, and it is based on a very specific result that you have come out with, and it definitely meets one of your primary objectives. So, at this point I would like you to remember that you might have so many results that are coming out of your study, but it is essential not to lose focus. So, it would be a good practice to stick to those central 2 to 3 ideas which we discussed in a slide earlier, and keep your results, your discussions, your conclusion and your recommendation around these central 2 to 3 ideas. This would make it easy for the reader to assimilate your research findings and draw those inferences around those central 2 to 3 ideas that you have in your mind. So, this is what a discussion session looks like. You start off with summary of findings, you interpret, infer, compare, state your strengths and limitations, draw your conclusions and also set out your recommendations. The next section is an abstract or a summary. This is basically a miniature manuscript. An abstract could be a structured abstract or an unstructured abstract. A structured abstract is nothing but your abstract is split into introduction, methods and results, or various journals could have different specifications about the structure you are supposed to follow while writing your abstract. An abstract could be anywhere between 100 to 350 words in length, and the one thing that I want you to remember is that an abstract is the most commonly read part of your manuscript. Many readers just read the title, read your abstract and move along. It is a good practice to invest a lot of time and thought into writing your abstract. Another form of abstract could be a plain language summary, which is basically intended for the common man. So, an abstract or summary, this is a structured abstract that you are seeing here, which has background, methods, results and conclusions. The next section would be on keywords, where you list a few words that you think your article is about. Now, this would be useful to the indexers who are basically classifying your article to belong to a particular category, and later when someone is using a search engine using specific words to look for articles related to that search word, your article will get picked up. So, your specifying the correct keywords will help your article to get picked up whenever a particular search term is entered into a search engine. So, specifying the correct keywords for your article ensures that it gets picked up and read more often, and thereby also cited more often if somebody finds your article relevant. Coming to the references, please make sure that all sources of information that you have used in your manuscript are referenced, or you give due credit to the source of information. Please stick to relevant and recent references. For bibliography management, you could take the help of various softwares that are now available to make this otherwise difficult task much easier. You must be aware of the different styles of referencing that are followed. Vancouver, Harvard are some examples that are commonly used. So, basically references, you have in-text citations and the list of references that you provide at the end of your manuscript. The in-text citation is basically the place the exact place within your manuscript where you have referred to a particular source of information, and the list of references that are presented at the end of the manuscript is where you alphabetically arrange or numerically enlist the number of references that you have used in your article. Now, we have basically seen the structure of your manuscript, the I, M, R and D structure. Now, we have to give a little thought about how to logically and sequentially arrange your ideas within these sections within this structure. Now, here we would like you to understand what an argument matrix is. An argument matrix is basically a framework that respects the structure of various sections within your manuscript while also helping you to develop 2 or 3 central ideas that you have fixed through these various sections of your manuscript. It helps these ideas flow naturally through these different sections. So, this is an argument matrix template. So, you list your ideas, idea 1, and this idea travels through the introduction, the methods, the results and the discussion, and even within the discussion where you are summarizing summarizing a given point about this central idea, whether you want to highlight anything about this in the limitations and in the conclusion and recommendations. So, while you stick to these ideas in that order within each section of your manuscript is going to follow a nice, beautiful linear order, and it makes it so much easier for the reader to understand what you are trying to say. Now, let us say you have a certain objective 1. So, please take care that you follow this objective 1 very clearly from the introduction through the methods as to how your methods met objective 1. In your results, how your results try to answer objective 1, and in your discussion, what that particular result about answering objective 1 actually means. So, this is how a central idea flows through the different sections of the manuscript. Now, there are certain optional sections which could later figure in your manuscript. One of this is highlights, where you list key messages from your research. Now, these are usually put into bullet points, 5 to 8 bullet points. Research in context. This is a very useful section where the journal asks you to specify what is already known in this particular research topic and what is that your study adds to the existing pool of knowledge. Now, a word about thesis. Now, most of you viewers are also postgraduate students who are in the process or who will soon be pursuing your thesis. Now, a dissertation is basically an extended, usually written treatment of a subject, and for all of you PG students watching this, it is also a mandatory part of your degree and it goes towards partial fulfillment of the requirement for your degree. So, when you look at your thesis, which like I said is mandatory for your PG or a doctoral degree as compared to a manuscript, a scientific manuscript, which is usually voluntary undertaking by any researcher. For your thesis, you are the primary researcher and the thesis is led by the resident or the scholar and ably guided by your thesis guide or your mentor. Your thesis is bound by university guidelines, as is your manuscript, which is bound by the journal guidelines, and your thesis can always be converted into a manuscript and go for publication in a scientific journal. So, the broad principles of scientific writing are similar, but there could be differences when you talk about word limit and the length of your thesis versus your manuscript. You have to understand that the target audience for both could be different. Then the structure and sections, while they are broadly similar, a thesis could have certain additional sections which are mandated by your university guidelines. Now we come to the second objective of this session, which is to give your manuscript its final shape by furnishing certain additional information. These will include the title page, where you give certain details about the authors, their affiliations and the word count in your article, the abstract and so forth. Then there is the cover letter, there is the funding source, the declaration of your conflict of interest, the author contributions. Now this is very important, where you specify what each author brought to the table and what is the specific stage at which each author had contributed, and these have to adhere to the ICMJE criteria. Then you have the appendices, the supplementary files, and the acknowledgement, where you put out a word of thank you to all those who had some role in facilitating your research project but did not qualify for authorship. There are a few sections that are only for your thesis but may not have a role in your manuscript. These will be the table of contents and the list of abbreviations, the list of tables, and the list of figures. This is an example of where all the additional information that you submit within your manuscript submission essentially appear in your final manuscript. A word about checking your manuscript or thesis for plagiarism. We strongly recommend that your thesis or manuscript is subjected to plagiarism check before it goes for submission for publication. Now we come to the final objective of this session, which is about articulating the content of your manuscript effectively so that the message is delivered. So there are certain broad tips for making your writing clearer. Use simple, specific, and only necessary words. Use consistent terminology to avoid confusing the reader. Use inclusive and non-offensive language. There are some journals which want you to explicitly state that you have taken care to use inclusive and non-offensive language in your manuscript. Use precise word order. Avoid passive voice, and be mindful of sentence length and structure, which is to say avoid long winding sentences which not only makes the reader lose interest but also confuses the reader. It is a good practice to submit your manuscript or thesis for scientific language editing, wherein a spell check is performed, grammar check is performed, the sentence structure is taken care of, and so is the punctuation. One could use professional services for scientific language editing or resort to the use of certain software which are available for this purpose. Now, as for formatting guidelines, as tiresome as this task may seem, it is very essential that you stick to the font size, the font style, the indent and spacing requirements, the heading style, and the paragraph style as recommended by the journal that you are submitting your manuscript to. Now, there are 6 S of scientific writing which you could use as a pointer when you are writing your manuscript. Keep it simple, short, structured, sequential, strong, and specific. Now, once you've written your draft, put in the additional information to give it its final shape and adhere to all the rules of scientific writing to give it its final shape, then we recommend that you subject it to multiple reviews. So you write, you rewrite, you read it yourself, you review it. One could also take the help of peers or experts who are willing to read your article and give you critical comments to improve the same. Based on these comments, you revise and you submit. We would recommend multiple reviews and revisions of your draft so that your final draft is submission ready. So I would like to leave you with these take-home messages. The first job is, when you are beginning to write your manuscript, please pick those central 2 to 3 ideas around which you are going to weave your manuscript, and those central 2 to 3 key messages which you want the reader to take home with him or her. Then we talked about the structure and sections within a manuscript, the IMRD structure. Then we spoke about fitting your ideas logically within the different sections within the structure. We talked about your scientific writing style and certain general tips and pointers on how to improve your scientific writing style. Please look to and adhere to the guidelines put forth by your university or the journals for your thesis or manuscript respectively. I want you to remember that scientific writing is not just about the skills but also about practice. So please keep at it until you keep getting better at it. So remember, Rome was not built in a day, neither will your manuscript be. So put in all the effort and take it through all the processes, and like I said, revise, review and revise and give it its final shape. Good luck with your submissions and thank you.